Good evening, folks. This is Caleb. Doing a um, follow-up on a January 16th show that I did on the National Emergency Act. The reason why I'm doing a follow-up on that, folks, is plain and simple that January 16th National Emergency Act show was prophetic in the fact that the president declared a national emergency this past month in February, approximately a month later after the show. And what is currently going on is a tug back and forth for the strings of power because, as I stated in that show, the president does have the right to declare a national emergency, and during that national emergency, he does have super constitutional authority that has been already codified in the National Emergency Act. Let me first share that with you so we can remind ourselves of that, and then we will move on from there. Okay, National Emergencies Act. Okay, I'll remind you, this is in Wikipedia, so it's easy to find. This is the NEA. It is enacted September 14th, 1976, codified at 50 U.S.C. 1601 through 1651, United States federal law, passed to end all previous national emergencies and to formalize the emergency powers of the president. The Congress does give this authority to the president during emergencies. This, as our previous show mentioned, one of those purposes for the emergencies and one of the previous purposes for which emergency was declared was to have the military do construction projects. So it's not unusual. There is a precedent set for the president doing what he's doing. What we're having here is they're finally starting to realize what my show stated is that the president's plan was to declare this national emergency all along, according to the Q board, and that's what I came across. The act authorized the president to activate emergency provisions of law via an emergency declaration on the conditions that the president specifies the provisions so activated and notifies Congress. An activation would expire if the president expressly terminated the emergency or did not renew the emergency annually, or if each House of Congress passed a resolution terminating the emergency. After presidents objected to the congressional termination provision on separation of powers grounds, and the Supreme Court in INS v. Chatta 1983 held such provisions to be unconstitutional legislative veto, it was replaced in 1985 with the termination by enacted joint resolution. A joint resolution passed by both chambers requires presidential signature, giving the president veto power over the termination, requiring a 2/3 majority in both houses in the case of a contested termination. The act also requires the president and executive agencies to maintain records of all orders and regulations that proceed from the use of the emergency authority and to regularly report the cost incurred to Congress. So what we have here is we have provisions that have been put in place. They are federal law. The president does have the right to declare an emergency, and there are means by which both houses of the Congress may terminate them. However, the president does have veto power, and that veto power would need to have 2/3 majority in both houses in order to overwhelm that veto power, which is highly unlikely that they're going to get 2/3 majority in the Senate, as they're 53 to 47 in the Senate right now. As I said, one of the reasons for declaring an emergency was previously declared a precedent that would allow the president to do construction contracts, and that was under 10 U.S.C. 2304 A-1, allowing exemption of national defense contracts for competitive bidding. Excuse me, that's the incorrect one. Let me find the correct one here. No, those are exceptions to the rule. That one I just read were the exceptions where he may not declare a national emergency for those reasons. Forgive me, but the president has, not this president, but previous presidents have used the the National Emergency Act to do construction projects. This brings up a host of questions because what can the president do when he's declared an emergency? Since it takes two-thirds of the bodies of both House and Senate in order to override a veto that he has the power to do it, we have to accept that he's going to continue on with this plan. So if that is the case, what does it mean? What does it mean to everyone involved? I've already brought up Rex 84 in the past, and things like Rex 84 are things that will happen under a national emergency. Now, what we're running into is that we don't know. We don't know as regular men and women what this portends. So I'm sharing Rex 84 with you right now to give you a flavor of the type of thing that occurs during a state of national emergency. The Rex 84 is a readiness exercise 1984, was classified as a scenario drill developed by the United States federal government to detain large numbers of United States citizens deemed to be national security threats in the event the president declared a state of national emergency. The plan was first revealed in detail in a major daily newspaper by reporter Alfonso Ciardi in 1987. Now, my last show declared this, but what does this mean? This means that during an emergency, the president has the right to evoke plans like Rex 84 and others that we will see can be used during this time frame. And what I mean by others is you'll see FEMA acts, you'll see a no-fly list, you'll see posse comitatus potentially changed, you'll see the terrorist screening database. They have the right to round up the terrorists on the terrorist screening database. There's the Violent Radicalization and Homegrown Terrorism Prevention Act of 2007. So there are a host of different issues that the president might enact due to this national emergency declaration. So now you can see why Congress, and I'm going to show you an article here. Several days ago, this is from the 8th, and this article is from let's see. Yes, it was March 8th. And the House has voted to block President Donald Trump's emergency declaration, a measure intended to get him billions of extra dollars to build his border wall. Well, that's not really the case, but you know, they need a headline. So, and then Senator Rand Paul announced on Friday, described his idea of a nightmare scenario if Congress allows President Donald Trump to declare a national emergency for a wall in the Mexican border. Now, so he knew in advance that this was a potential to happen, and it's the same thing that I knew, that this was the plan all along, this to declare a national emergency. In Paul's dystopian future, President Bernie Sanders would use that precedent to declare climate change or gun violence a national emergency and take drastic action. So Rand Paul's looking forward to the future and saying that, you know, if this president declares a national emergency and does what he wants to do, then the next president can. If the next president is Bernie Sanders and he says climate change is an emergency, we could have soldiers building solar panels, Paul said as he talked to the media during a stop in Northern Kentucky Friday. Paul, a Republican from Bowling Green, has pledged to vote against Trump's declaration of national emergency to pay for the border wall. If Trump's national emergency stands, future presidents may have unchecked powers, Paul said. When asked by the Inquirer what he meant, Paul cited concerns that the president can confiscate guns and limit uses of cars, especially if it were Bernie Sanders. So, yeah, you know, it's kind of iffy whether they're fighting Trump about this or whether they're claiming that they're fighting Trump about it because for future reasons because they're trying to limit the power of the executive. Paul also said he believes as many as 10 Senate Republicans will join him in voting against Trump's declaration. The House voted late last week to block Trump's declaration with 13 Republicans joining the Democrats. But in order to make the block stick, more Republicans would have to join, with the 10 more in the Senate and 45 more in the House. Well, we'll see what happens. It's not yet over. There's a lot of debate going on in our caucus. So what we see is we see the House and the Senate coming to the realization that that you heard first here on Patriot Soapbox on the 16th of January, that this emergency declaration of emergency is no joke. It is a serious deal, and because I believe it was part of the plan, I think that they they were very foolish in not um, bargaining with President Trump at the outset, because this was the intention. And the reason this was the intention is because not only is the National Emergency Act in play, but also the U.S. Department of Homeland Security Federal Emergency Management Agency, HSPD-20, which is the Federal Continuity Directive, Federal Executive Branch National Continuity Program Requirements, which is HSPD-20 or Presidential Directive 51, which the president, in fact, President Bush, if I'm correct, enacted this as a response to the National Emergencies Act. So let me read the purpose on this, which is, it starts to really broaden the flavor of what we're going through, folks. Presidential Policy Directive 40, National Continuity Policy, directs the Secretary of Homeland Security to administrator of FEMA to coordinate the implementation, execution, and assessment of continuity activities among executive departments and agencies. Specifically, the administration of FEMA is directed to develop and promulgate federal continuity directives to establish continuity programs and planning requirements for executive departments and agencies. The Federal Continuity Directive 1 implements this requirement by establishing the framework requirements and processes to support the development of Ds and As, continuity programs, and by specifically in defining elements of a continuity plan. These required elements include delineation of essential functions, succession to office, and delegations of authority, safekeeping, and of access to essential records, continuity locations, continuity communications, human resources planning, devolution of essential functions. That's a strange one. Devolution of essential functions, reconstitution and program validation through testing, scope, and exercises. Okay, it lists the scope in here, it lists the policy and background, so, more information. But let's get into these NEFs. What are non-national essential functions? As established in PPD 40 is the policy of the United States to maintain a comprehensive and effective continuity capability through continuity of operations, co-op, continuity of government, COG, and enduring constitutional government programs, ECG, ensuring the resilience and preservation of government structure under the United States Constitution, and the continuous performance of national essential functions, NEFs, under all conditions. National continuity programs are based on the continuous performance of NEFs through the sustainment of essential functions performed by D/As. NEFs are the focal point of all continuity programs and capabilities and represent the overarching responsibilities of the federal government to lead and sustain the nation before, during, and the aftermath of catastrophic emergency. The NEFs are as follows: ensuring the continued function and form of government of the United States Constitution, including the function of 3 separate branches of government, providing leadership visible to the nation and the world, and maintaining the trust and confidence of the American people, defending the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and preventing or interdicting attacks against the United States or its people, property, or interests, maintaining and fostering effective relationships with foreign nations, protecting against threats to the homeland, and bringing to justice perpetrators of crimes or attacks against the United States or its people, property, or interests. Now, I have to stop right there, folks. Number 5 says that this is a directive of the national essential functions of HSPD 20. Number 5, protecting against threats to the homeland and bringing to justice perpetrators of crimes or attacks against the United States or its people, property, or interests. So that's part of the National Emergency Act. It's part of the National Essential Functions list. So therefore, this declaration of emergency was done partially for this purpose, for bringing these people to justice, providing rapid and effective response and recovery from domestic consequences of an attack or other incident, protecting and stabilizing the nation's economy and ensuring public confidence in its financial systems, and providing for federal government services that address the national health, safety, and welfare needs of the United States. Well, the background was that it was put out in 2007, and as I suspected, that was when Bush was in office. May 4, 2007, the president signed National Security Presidential Directive NSPD 51, Homeland Security Presidential Directive HSPD-20 National Continuity Policy. So it was signed, and then it was, I believe, updated July 15, 2016. The president signed PPD 40, National Continuity Policy, replaced by NSPD 51 / HSPD-20 and the NCPIP, addressing lessons learned, best practices, and the integration of new technologies and processes since 2007. So we see here that President Trump has updated this on July 15, 2016, with new technologies and processes learned and best practices since 2007. Some relevant material in NCPIP was added to PPD 40, and certain portions were adopted in this FCD. So we don't necessarily know what those changes have been. And this act, this HSPD-20, has several classified annexes, which is really strange because we don't even know what everything that's entailed in this act, in this federal law or executive mandated law. PPD 40 requires appointment of continuity coordinator at the assistant secretary level or higher. As a recommended best practice, should consider appointing a continuity manager to handle day-to-day management of the continuity program. These roles are further explained below. Okay, so they're laying out the roles of who's involved: interagency continuity working group, small agency council continuity of operations committee. So basically they can shut down the government and they can determine what functions are necessary in order to run it. And it's all stipulated here in these laws: delegation of authority, communications information systems, essential records management, alternate locations, human resources, devolution. This one I thought was unique. Devolution is a component of continuity planning that establishes procedures to transfer statutory authority and responsibilities from an organization's primary operating staff and facilities to another designated staff and one or more facilities for the purpose of sustaining essential functions. A devolution may be temporary or may endure for an extended period. A devolution plan is activated upon the threat or in response to a catastrophic emergency that either renders the organization's primary leadership and operating staff unavailable or leaves them incapable of sustaining essential functions from primary facilities. Well, it says see Annex 1, devolutions for specific requirements. Well, Annex 1 is classified. So how am I going to see Annex 1, the devolution for specific requirements? Okay. So this is getting very interesting. And what we're seeing is a major power play for the power of our government being played out before our eyes. And this hasn't happened before, folks. And so this is a big deal. This is a war. Okay, we get to part 8, readiness reporting system. The readiness reporting system is an automated system FEMA maintains to track federal continuity capabilities at all times under conditions. RRS provides a method for executive branch organizations to report their capacity to perform MEFs and PMEFs. FEMA provides information obtained from RRS to inform National Continuity Coordinator on comprehensive executive branch continuity capability. So there are comms already set up. There's a line of management of information to determine how effective the continuity plan is running. Then part 10, coordination with state, local, tribal, and territorial governments, non-governmental organizations, and private sector critical infrastructure owners and operators. So they've already set up communication with NGOs, CWGs, area and regional coordinators and tribal coordinators. Operations security, they have an operations security. The point of contact is the assistant administrator, NCP FEMA. Okay, so why don't we have the annexes? Why don't we know what these annexes are? Because they're classified. So here's some of the annexes that are not classified are attached. And it's a very interesting read. But what I see is that this exists at all is the most important function, because what this does is means that this event has already been anticipated, and that everything in order to make it operate is legal, and that he has the authority, he has the right, he has the purpose, he has the reason, he has the precedent to declare a national emergency and thereby declare business continuity plan in HSPD-20 to be effective. And what this does is really open up all those things that we anticipate may even occur. So we've got classified annexes, we've got REX 84, we've got Cable Splicer, which is another program set to round up all illegals and push them out of the country. So folks, we don't know really what could happen. We don't know what can take place. Now, our imaginations tend to run wild at that point, but looking at the Q drops, we need to understand that there are certain things that are going to take place, which is, from those national essential functions. The economy needs to be mandated, needs to be set right. If there are any threats, they need to be dealt with. And if there are any criminals, they need to be dealt with and need to be prosecuted, and the country needs to be made safe. So what are we dealing with now? We're dealing with a circumstance where these folks they really are stupid. They really they stepped right into POTUS's plan and Q's plan, and allowed themselves to be put into a national emergency situation, which gives the president super constitutional authority. So, folks, we're going to see some really strange things going on here, and I hope and pray that they're just normal. That everything just flies as normal. But we can suspect that these folks suddenly realizing that they need to fight this national emergency declaration means that they understand the predicament that they've been placed in. So, reading the Constitution yesterday on my show, I realized that there's only several circumstances by which an acting congressman or senator may be arrested, and otherwise they're protected. And one of those is treason. So we need to be mindful of these things. They need to do this legally, and they really have taken their time to do this by the book. So now that we're in a national emergency, which has 4 phases of continuity: readiness and preparedness, activation, continuity operations, and then reconstitution. So, they've planned even for when it gets shut down, how it's supposed to be put back in place. And there are different readiness levels, just like, with DEFCON, they have what's called a COGON, Executive Branch Continuity of Government Readiness Conditions Matrix. So this indicates, what circumstances are existing that move you from one phase to another. Okay. So why I'm doing this recording is because, folks, we need to be aware that you need to trust the plan. You need to understand that these folks are playing by the book, that all this stuff is legal. It's been on the books, for as far as the National Emergency Act, we're talking, 30, 40 years as far as this, HSPD directive. Bush put it in place in 2007, and it's been updated in 2016. So we need to be really aware and really vigilant, because these things are upon us. And let's just be honest. We really don't know what's going to happen, but we do know what the president has told us, that he's going to give us back our government. And so I thank you again for allowing me the time in your to speak into your ear and show you some information that I believe is pertinent to giving us some peace and giving us some understanding in our current circumstances. Thank you, and have a wonderful day or night, whichever is applicable.